Okay, welcome to Thursday. All right, look, today is National Chicken Dance Day. But before you all get excited, I am not playing the song because it's also National Decency Day, and those 2 days are just incompatible in my book. I'm choosing decency. And if you want to do the chicken dance, you'll just have to do that after we're done here. But speaking of decency, our guest today more than fulfills that description. We've got Jim Meyers back on the program to explore the new residential provisions in the 2021 IECC and highlight not only the changes, but also how these changes will affect utilities, trades, home builders, designers, and code officials. Now, who is Jim Meyers, you ask? Well, he is the Director of Buildings Efficiency Program for the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, or SWEEP. In that role, Jim works on increasing energy efficiency in buildings. He's responsible for leading the buildings programs, including adoption of newer energy codes and standards, going beyond code with green building programs, studies to verify energy savings from programs and codes, and opportunities for electrifying buildings. At one point in Jim's career, he served as technical director of a home energy rating provider, where he provided rater training, quality assurance, and program direction. He has delivered building efficiency trainings across numerous building industries. Now, currently, Jim actively participates in International Code Council committees, and he sat on the 2021 Residential IECC Committee, as the very code we'll be talking about today. Now, before we get started, I wanted to let you know today's webinar is brought to you by PowerShift by NV Energy. It's a program that helps residential and business customers conserve energy and save money on their power bills. PowerShift is a one-stop resource to find energy-efficient products and services. For more information, please visit nvenergy.com/PowerShift. Now, during the course of today's presentation, you could submit questions for our guest. Simply use the questions box on the right side of your screen in the GoToWebinar control panel. I'll review those questions and pose them to Jim during the Q&A time set aside after his presentation. Jim, welcome back, my friend.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate this opportunity to present on the 2021 IECC on Chicken Dance Day. I think that's pretty cool. I wasn't aware of the celebration, so I won't be dancing. I'll be sitting in my seat here as I'm talking about this. So we're going to go through this pretty quick. When I say pretty quick, I have almost 60 slides for 60 minutes. And the question to you is the 2021 IECC massive changes or incremental improvements? Also want to mention that the 2021 IECC is not yet final. There has been an appeal for the online governmental vote. And so it's gone through that first 30-day cycle or timeline. And now there's another 30 days, as I just found out from ICC the other day, for ICC to respond. But ICC still has the plan to have the 2021 IECC released in the fall, the September-October timeframe, to be released with the other Group B codes, the IRC, which was the other main ICC code that went through the Group B, and there's the different section or the different phase of the code adoption process. So as Mike said, I sat on the 2021 code. There I am. Hello, everyone. And SWEEP, we covered 6 Southwest states. We're a nonprofit, and we support and advocate for energy efficiency to be advanced throughout the economy of 6 states. My focus is buildings, but we also work with utilities, transportation, electrification. We have staff in 5 of our 6 states. The other one, Wyoming, we just drive up the road from Denver to up to Cheyenne to support Wyoming. We're one of 6 RIOs, Regional Energy Efficiency Organizations. There's one almost everywhere across the U.S. And you can see a picture of where we're at. SWEEP's on the lower west to southwest side of that map. Okay, so we're going to talk about these points in the 2021 today, and each of these could have their own webinar. You could go into to a full hour, if not more, for some of these topics and discuss them. And like the ERI, there was just one ResNet, and Ryan Meyers at ResNet just had a webinar discussing the ERI in the 2021. So there will be ongoing webinars from all kinds of different sources and industry as the 2021 code gets closer to being released. Okay, we're going to start with the envelope changes. And so this is the 2018 prescriptive table. And I'm showing this prescriptive table. We know there's other pathways. This is just the R value table, if you think of it that way. It's easy for us to think of an R20 or think of an R13 versus looking at a U value number. And so I'm not going to show that table at all, but it aligns with the R value table. And then there is the performance path that uses the table. And then the ERI has their own pathway, but it looks at this table to verify that it reaches a certain level of efficiency. So this is the 2018. I'm going to show you the 2021. And so what happened in a lot of the code change proposals, as Mike said, I was on the committee, and there were a lot of code change proposals. There was 300 plus proposals that came through to add clarity, to add the ability to have the code where it could be complied with easier from both the builder, the trade, and the building official. And so a lot of clarifying language. So in the second bullet right here, so in the prescriptive table, I'll go back up to that. We had a 13 plus 5. If we look at climate zone 3, where Las Vegas is located, Clark County, we had a 13 plus 5 in the wood frame wall. Well, in the new code, it'll be, say, 13 and 5. So there's confusion about the plus. I got it, but there has been confusion, so now it'll say a 13 and 5. And then there'll be, for that 5, there'll be a CI, that acronym, continuous insulation. That acronym's been used for years in the commercial energy code. There's also some other options for cavity only and for exterior only insulation options, depending upon the climate zone. So here I took the screen capture from Matt Reisender's YouTube channel, and here's a house that meets the code, the energy code. All the insulation is on the exterior of this house, and it could have been built that way. All the in the past codes with the trade-off approach, or with the ERI, or with the performance path. But now in the prescriptive table, there's a pathway to have insulation just in the cavity or just on the exterior. So what I'm showing here is red and purple. Black, no changes, or at least I'm not addressing that right now, but I'm talking about sealing in the walls and the basements. So red is an increase in efficiency. So climate zone 2 now has an R49 in the attic. I won't tell you where I voted, but I didn't vote for that. And so all of those reds, their insulation increased prescriptively. Then if you look at the purple, what's happened there, as I mentioned, that there was a cavity only, or there was a continuous only option. The purple was additional requirements. So let's go down and look at climate zone 6. So now there's a 30. That's in the cavity. There's a 20 and 5, which was there before. There's a 13 and 10, which was in the last code. But now there's also a 0 and 20. That H is a footnote. We're not going to get into that footnote, but that's what that is. So the purple 30 was the additional opportunity for a builder to build prescriptively with a 30 in the cavity or a 0 and a 20. Doesn't tell you how you're going to get to that 30. It doesn't tell you what kind of insulation you're going to do in that cavity. It doesn't tell you what framing materials you're going to use, the depth of the framing materials. It just says, oh, if you want to do cavity only, you have to get to an R30. Somehow, within whatever framing that aligns with your R30 insulation. That's what it says. If we go up to climate zone, so in climate zone 3, where SWEEP we do work with industry down in Clark County, they now have a 0 cavity and a 15 continuous in climate zone 3. And then in climate zone 5, there is a new efficiency, and the efficiency there is a 13 and 10. It was a 13 and 5. It was a 20 and a 13 and 5. Now it's a 20 and 5 and a 13 and 10, and then a 0 cavity and a 15 continuous. Over on the slab side, where we've got some numbers there in red, climate zone 3, a new slab insulation requirement. It wasn't there in the past codes. And then in climate zone 4 and 5, the change there was it's 4 feet. It used to be 2 feet, 2 feet down and under, 2 feet down and out, 2 feet down for the slab insulation. The other purples is just, I'm just showing that there were changes there, and it was the CI that was added. So the basement wall, just the CI was added. Crawl space, just the CI was added. In the floor value, those values were in the last code. In what's happened here is there was a footnote in climate zone 5, 6, and 7, and it said if you could not fit that insulation value for the floor within that cavity, you could use an R19. What happened was the proposal was submitted to strike that footnote, and the footnote was, through the online governmental vote, was supported, and that was removed. And again, this is preliminary. We think this is what it's going to look like, very, very close to what it will look like. But that's what the change was in the floor values there. I think I'll just pass this. We already talked about ceiling insulation. So on windows, there were some changes there. Fenestration numbers came down to a 0.30 from a 0.32. We were in 0.32 in the 2018 code. And then in climate zone 5 now has a solar heat gain coefficient requirement. And so this picture I have here, I took this picture about 7 years ago. It could be 8 years ago. And this is a production builder in the South Denver metro area putting these homes in, double pane, not triple, low E, and they were hitting 0.28 in production homes back 7 years ago. So we know these values are achievable. The proponents that submitted these proposals listed the penetration of the window products that are available. And so it showed that these fenestration U values of 0.30 are definitely doable. And as the U factor comes down, the solar heat gain coefficient has been coming down too. So that's not an issue. We're seeing, I reside in the climate zone 5, the Denver market, and we're seeing below 0.40 SHGC on standard windows going into residential. So next, there's the area weighted average that comes up for windows, and this comes into play if there is the trade-off pathway. So think of res check, or the performance pathway, or the ERI pathway. Or excuse me, on this one it's just the performance pathway. And so what it was, the maximum U factors were higher. And so you could trade and get your average maximum U factor higher. And in this code, 2021, it would be dropping them. So climate zone 4 and 5, it's dropped down to a 0.40. It was a 0.48 for that average, weighted average maximum value. Climate zone 6 through 8, it was a 0.40. So that's where they came down. That's where the efficiency in this code change proposal came in and was approved by the online governmental vote. And then FHGC also has a maximum weighted average, and that came down. That used to be a 0.50 in the 2018 code, so that's come down to a 0.40. Other changes that happen with fenestration in windows is there are some changes if you're at elevation, so above 4,000 feet elevation. I'm in Denver, we're at Mile High City, over 5,000 feet. So what happens is you don't then have to align with the prescriptive 0.30 value. You can go up to the 0.32, which aligns with the 2018. And that's for elevation. So there are some climates that are same climate zone as Denver, but they're not at the elevation, so they would then be required for the 0.30 prescriptively, and the climates that are above 4,000 foot elevation would then be able to move to the 0.32. There's also new requirements for wind-borne debris that was brought in to the code. It's referencing a new ASCE standard in the code, and that's saying if you're, and I have a graphic up here for you, if you're along the south Gulf or if you're along the eastern border, you've got some hurricane-prone regions, and so you can qualify with these changes in the window requirements. And then if you see the blue, the special wind regions, they also fall into that. So also the islands, whether it's in the Caribbean or in the Pacific, those also fall under the hurricane-prone region. So this is a new addition to the code, and it provides the opportunity for windows to be installed. And it's usually around the windows being able to support the hurricane requirements or the wind requirements that are more challenged with the lower U factors. Okay, air barrier and testing is the next item we're going to talk about today. And there were, I don't know how many, there were many changes proposed changes to this table. And if this table came into the code in the 2009 IECC, it came in after the Energy Star thermal bypass checklist that had come out a few years before that. And so it's somewhat of a checklist, and about 80% of the proposals were submitted by energy raters. And the energy raters presented this as, this is being used as a checklist. This is being used as a guide. The committee was saying the code is not a guide, the code is not a checklist, and it's not, but this table is providing clarification, it's providing guidance, and the raters are using this as guidance, and the trades are learning of their requirements from this table. And so not major changes from a efficiency perspective or technical perspective, but clarifying this table for use by the industry. And so here's an example, just some simple, struck out a sentence that was redundant under the air barrier for general requirements. And then here's another example. There was no air barrier criteria for plumbing, but this was an area where the raters thought there should be information. Holes created by the wiring, plumbing, or other obstructions need to be air sealed. And the committee and the online governmental vote supported it. There's also in the right side of that table, that's the insulation requirement. So there was no requirement there, or they modified the requirement, excuse me, for plumbing and wiring to align with their air sealing. So it adds criteria, but it's really there for clarity. I'll just go through some of these pictures. And so the next one, here's one always question, narrow cavities. So this was added for narrow cavities. If you have a narrow cavity of 1 inch or less, and you're not able to insulate, you air seal it. And just so you think about the cavities around the windows, that's really where it's going to be. And that was supported by the committee and everybody that came through after that. Okay, and then ongoing with this table, I'm just showing you some high-level ones, air barrier for duct shafts and recessed lighting, adding clarity. So when this table comes out, when the final version comes out, take a look at the table, see what was added. In the code, you'll see the change bars on the right side. Take a look and see where the change bars are located and see what's now in the code. The underline you see here, that's the language that was added. And the strike through is the language that was currently in the code being stricken, and that's how the proposal looks. And that's how the committee received the proposal and reviewed it. So this is just saying, hey, you know, if you're using a vapor retarder, and that's part of the IRC, don't use it as an air barrier. And so this picture here, this is not new construction, this is existing construction, and this vapor retarder became an air barrier because of the way it was installed and sealed. The other big one is leakage. So we had the insulation, and we just talked about the air barrier and insulation table. This is a new one, leakage. And so there's a number of changes here. I think everybody is going to like. The builders and the raters appreciated what's coming into the code. So there's a new definition. This definition is saying a dwelling unit enclosure area. The reason for this is because of attached units, whether they're attached townhomes or whether they're stacked. There's been the challenge to reach the air change per hour requirements in the air leakage testing area of the code. And so dwelling unit enclosure area fits for those attached units, especially stack units. And so that's in the definition. Then from the air leak, on the air leakage side, you can, and so yeah, so these kind of units, you're going to be able to use this other acceptable pathway. You can still use the ACH, but this is an acceptable alternative. And so now the air leakage can be measured at CFM per square foot. That aligns with the dwelling unit enclosure area, your ceilings, floors, and walls. And now you just have to be better than 0.30 CFM per square foot. It applies to what I just mentioned, stacked, attached units. It also applies to single family, detached. The rating community, the builders have said this is a challenge when you're building smaller units to hit those numbers because the volume's not there. And you need the greater the volume in a home, the easier it is to get to the ACH numbers. And so small, detached, single family also qualifying. This is a conditioned area. Okay, and then we continue on multifamily. So over the years, the ResNet Multifamily Committee has been working on the challenges of testing multifamily and complying with ResNet with multifamily. And so committee members from that committee were very active in participating and proposing changes to the 2021 code. And so now with multifamily, some of that has moved in, and this could be a whole another webinar just on the multifamily and the leakage in multifamily, because there's a lot of great information. So, but it's really multi-zone testing, single zone. There's a lot of opportunities that are there that weren't in the code before. And then, of course, you have your individual dwelling units with the multifamily. The other thing I wanted to mention is, it might seem minor, but the numeric ACH, the way the code has been written, it said 3 ACH, 5 ACH, but it was spelled out THREE. It was a word. And so there was interpretation of what that meant. And if a report came back and it came at 3.2 numerically, was that a 3? If it came back at 5.2, was that a 5? And so the code now says 3 is 3.0, 5 is 5.0. So going from a word to a numeric, that's a change. So that should add clarity, because during the presentations from the presenters, that was discussed as areas that had come up. Ongoing with leakage, we have testing has been mandatory in the code now, a couple cycles, and so the building or dwelling units shall be tested for air leakage. That's now in the code, dwelling units. And what was not in the code before is if you did a different pathway, if you did an ERI or you did a performance pathway, there wasn't a limit on what you could, what limit of leakage you could have in that residential unit. And now it's come in and says, okay, 5 ACH or less is the max air leakage you could have to qualify for the code with the ERI pathway or the performance pathway. Prescriptive, you're going to fall under the other ACH we just showed in the previous slide. But in this, if you're using these two pathways, you now have to, you're going to max out at 5 ACH for the software to come back and say, yep, it met the code, either ERI or performance. Okay, so system changes. We'll jump into the system. We'll start with duct testing, kind of leads up with leakage. Like I was just mentioning, there wasn't a limit on the air leakage if you use the two performance pathways. Well, now it's similar. You've got you shall not exceed 8.0 CFM. No matter what other pathway you're using, that's your limit that you can have for your duct leakage. Testing stills at rough or post-construction. The one change that has come in and probably controversy when the 2021 code comes around for adoption, it's this exception. The exception 1 in the 2018 code and the 2015 code, it exempted out duct leakage testing for ducts that were in conditioned space. So with that exception being removed, now duct testing is required in conditioned space. Exception number 2 becomes exception number 1, but it's not in a specific section of the code. It's just the exception is deleted. So the interpretation then, because it says ducts shall be tested. Now ducts are required to be tested in conditioned space. Okay, so then we'll continue on with ducts. They've got different insulation values depending upon the duct size. When they're outside conditioned space, there's some new requirements that came in for floors and walls. And so here's an example. I pulled this from the proponent's reason statement. And in this example, you have to have the air barrier between the unconditioned space and the duct. And you have to have a separation, at least in R19, between that duct and the unconditioned space. So that's something that'll need to be addressed in floor cavities. I've seen this for years here in the Denver market where I'm located, where builders, where ducts are going in, floors above garages, they're framing down and they're increasing that duct insulation between the air barrier, the drywall, and the duct. And so that's now in the code, will be in the code. For exterior walls, another similar. So you're going to have your air barrier, again, between your unconditioned space and your duct, and then you have to have a minimum of R10 between your duct and your outside sheeting. So those are new requirements in the 2018 that weren't there in the past. Building science industry has talked about this for years, having enough insulation on the outside between the conditioned space and the unconditioned space in the ducts, excuse me, but now in the code for the 2021. The next one is mechanical ventilation. So this table came into the code back in 2012, I want to say, and these values, HRV, ERV was added. I believe that was 2015, but since that time, the fan efficacies have improved, and they're really lining up with Energy Star. Again, the proponents said this is what's going into the market, this is what we're seeing, and they're pretty much aligning with Energy Star products. And so these came in, and these do align with Energy Star, and so you'll see whether it's a bathroom, an inline fan, ERV, HRV did not change, and the range hoods did not change, but these align with the newer, the products that are coming out, the more efficient products, and the Energy Star versions. Also, this is a new addition to that table I was just showing. So this is when the air handler is being used. Well, that's silly, really silly. An air handler is used well, with the HVAC equipment, but now there's a minimum efficacy requirement that will be listed in the table. Wasn't there in the past, but now it will be listed in addition to the other fan types. Continuing with mechanical ventilation, in climate zone 7 and 8, an ERV or HRV are required. Not the warmer climates, but just in the cold climates of 7 and 8, an ERV or HRV are required in those climate zones. It must be balanced, and it has a sensible heat recovery efficiency requirement for the units. Continuing on with mechanical ventilation, there's some additional information in the code talking about testing, and it, just like other sections of the code, will list examples of air barriers and sealing. This is talking about ventilation and flow rates using a flow hood, a box, flow grid, and so forth. So that's new. The last bullet here is talking about a written report being submitted to the building official. So going over to the commercial code has had commissioning in for 4 cycles now since 2012, and they've had to submit a commissioning report to the building official. That's all they had to do. They didn't have to have it approved. They didn't have to go through any specific review, but they did have to submit. And this is similar. I would imagine there could be some interpretation at local levels, local municipalities, but just the written report needs to be submitted to the building official. It doesn't say it has to be approved. So that'll be new to the code. And I'm not sure, I don't think anybody is really pushing back on that with the appeal that Mike mentioned earlier at the very beginning of the webinar. So water heat. So there's some new requirements in the code, and I'm first going to talk about compactness of hot water. You're saying, what on earth is compactness of hot water? Well, this is a calculation, and it's done in software, and this is in ERI. It's not identical. It aligns, but it's not identical to what's in the ERI. So looking at the hot water systems, and it's looking to see the hot water area by area in that conditioned space. So it's looking at wet rooms and faucets and so forth, and the surface water heater where they're located. And this only applies to the performance path. So that's R405, not prescriptive, not res check, UA trade-off, not ERI, but in the 405 pathway. So this will go into the software to do the calculation, but this information needs to be put on the plan. So what's the conditioned floor space? What is the hot water system? Is it by a rectangle? You're not going to have to do a triangle or rhombus or anything, just a rectangle, and you're going to come up with a compactness ratio, okay? And so I'll flip through the next slide. Here's another example. And so now what's going to happen is you're going to have a compactness ratio. And I'm going to go back one slide. And in this 1-story, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, the compactness ratio is 50%. That's because the conditioned floor space for the 1-story was 1147. The hot water system rectangle was 575 square feet. Looking at the ratio, it's 50%, and then going over to this table's part of the code, and looking at compactness ratio 1-story, go down to the second row, it's right there, then go over to the third column, that's the hot water distribution system factor. That will be put into the calculation. That will then be calculated in the software. But this information that I'm showing right now, going back to this diagram, this needs to be on the plans. That's what it states. It shall be on the plans, and it's only the performance path, R405, and recognizing this is being done in ERI, being done in HERS. So it's in addition to the performance path. And this is to gain efficiency in hot water. So hot water efficiency. And so again, it's looking at the sources, hot water heaters, loops, whatever. If you've got heat trace pipe, that would be part of that rectangle. Any of your termination points, your faucets shown on the plans. If you have more than one water heater, you have a larger home, more than one water heater, then you'd have 2 rectangles. Because each water heater would be servicing a different source, a different plumbing source, or different plumbing. If the water heater is included in the basement, that's counted. So that's, if we go back up to the table here, then you're going to get your compact ratio. It's going to be even smaller because you'll have more area with the basement. But again, this hot water distribution system factor will go into the software. So the rater, person who's doing the performance path, would have to enter that information into the software, and then the software would then calculate. This is part of the code. Next thing is water heat. And so this is prescriptive. This came into the code. Committee didn't, I don't remember, sorry. It's been a year since we had our committee meeting. Not sure if the committee voted this unanimously or whether it failed just barely, but it was through the rest of the voting process. The online governmental vote of ICC members did approve this, and this is for the prescriptive pathway. And so any of these can be chosen. There's not a conflict with the NACA requirements for efficiency, that it's not going beyond NACA, because they can choose any of these. And so you're not limited to a tankless system or electric water heat. So you have multiple options that you could choose from. Solar. So on item 5 and 6, there's new definitions being added to the code for grid enabled. What is that? So solar fraction, what is that? That's new definitions that'll be added to the code describing those. And that's prescriptive. Jumping into lighting, I'm going to move a little quicker. So lighting controls and efficacy. So here on the efficacy, the values that came into the that are in the 2018 Energy Code came into the code in the 2009. So it hadn't been updated in years. And in the 2009 code, it had a different lumens, the LM, per watt based on the size of the bulb. Or if it was greater than 45 watts, if it was 20 to 45 watts, 44 watts, and so forth. Now it's just that second to last bullet. It's 70 lumens per watt for all connected lamps. Now a lamp is what you're just going to screw in. That's your lamp. There's a different requirement for a light fixture. A light fixture is you're going to install on a light fixture which has an integrated lamp. And they have a difference, so 45 lumens per watt. This is for a, yeah, and so it aligns with the federal minimums that have been going up, and states have been increasing their requirements. Also, their controls. Controls have been in the commercial code for many cycles, and now there's some controls being added to residential. So a dimmer is considered a control, occupancy sensors considered a control. Other controls could be used. You know, the industry is always coming out with something new, so it leaves that flexibility for other. You have exceptions there, bathrooms and hallways. You don't want an occupancy sensor going off when you're in the bathroom. Definitely not in commercial restrooms. So safety and security always trump the energy code. And so any lighting for safety and security is exempted. So where it will come into play is multifamily residential. So this picture here, 3 stories. This building, the energy code, it complies with the residential energy code. If it was 4 stories, it would have needed to comply with the commercial energy code. Well, the commercial energy code already has all the lighting requirements and the exterior lighting requirements. But on the residential side, it didn't. Now, there are requirements in the codes for safety, and so those are there. They've been there in the exterior lighting requirements. But from an efficiency perspective, they've not been there. So these are new. So there's maximum watts per square foot, lighting controls, so 1 to 2 family dwellings as an exception. And what it has is it has a max wattage, and you're really not going to hit that wattage. Maybe if you have a 7,000 square foot single family home, you might, but on just a typical single family home or a townhouse, attached townhouse, you're not going to hit those levels of wattage. And so it's really going to apply, the exterior lighting requirements are going to apply for this type of building, multifamily, 3 stories or less. Okay, electric vehicles. I'm watching my time, Mike, I'm moving. Okay, electric vehicles. So over the last 3 years, from coast to coast, from West Coast to East Coast, we've seen municipalities that have been adding in requirements for electric vehicle infrastructure into the building codes. as the electric vehicle industry is growing, and the primary place for charging is overnight at one's residence. And so this only applies to new construction. Again, there are cities, Atlanta, I think of Atlanta, of course you've got the West Coast. Here in the Denver market, Denver brought in requirements 3 years ago. But it was just, at that time, just the infrastructure. So you either put in a wire or you put in a conduit. So builders have been putting in conduits for the last few years. Denver, with their 2018 code that they just adopted, they took language from the 2021 code and moved it into their 2018 code. So 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhomes, we're talking residential here, you must have an EV-ready space. So there's a definition for EV-ready space. That's it. You're going to be wired, you're going to be at your panel, and you're going to have an outlet at your parking space. That's an EV-ready space. It's ready for the EV. And so we've got numerous manufacturers that are saying they're going to be adding electric vehicles to their mix and moving more and more to that, in addition to, Tesla's all 100% electric. But we're seeing more and more manufacturers that are saying we're going to go electric. This also applies to multifamily, new construction. And so in the case of multifamily, there is a matrix. This matrix, you'll see this matrix over in the commercial side. The commercial committee approved it on the commercial code for the 2021 IECC. And again, I'm seeing communities in the Southwest where I work, Flagstaff, Sedona, small communities that are adding EV infrastructure, EV readiness requirements. It's pretty interesting to see what is happening in that space. So a new definition, EV capable, basically you're talking about you've got your raceways or you've got your conduit. So it's capable, you just have to then wire it, hook it to the panel, have your outlet and so forth. But so there's ready and there's capable, and so there's different requirements for EV ready and EV capable. That's in both, that's in multifamily. So doing good on time. I'm talking fast and my voice is holding out. Efficiency packages. So I'm going to talk again about the commercial code, and I know they're not the same. I know the buildings are different. A single family residential, a condominium, a townhouse is different than a office building or a lodging structures or a retail building. They are different. But on the commercial side, they've had additional efficiency packages for years, and that's in their section C406 of the commercial code. And so the commercial code has said, you do these things, you do the performance path, you could do the prescriptive path, you could do your trade-off path, and you choose an efficiency package. One of these options, you choose that. So there were a number of proposals that came in, and one was approved through the online governmental vote. And I believe this was NBI's, New Buildings Institute's proposal that came through. If it wasn't, I apologize, but I think it was this one. And so they have additional efficiency packages. Again, you're going to do the code requirements, and then you're going to choose from this list. A couple people have called this the flex packages, but it's additional efficiency packages. And so here in this page right here, you've got your HVAC equipment, higher efficiency heating, higher efficiency cooling equipment. Doesn't conflict with makeup because you're not mandated to do this. It's an option. You could choose this and get credit for this as your package. And then your water heat, that's another one you can look at. Then your duct systems, where are your ducts and your air handlers? Are they all in conditioned space? So you get credit for that. If you're going to go low on your air sealing, then you're going to have an ERV or HRV. Now, there's one thing about this additional efficiency package. It's only recognizing ACH 50. So at the local level, there would have to be an amendment that would have to come in and say, if you were going to have an attached unit or a small single family detached and have the CFM 50, you'd have to have an equivalent type number. If you're below a certain level, that would need to be added. Otherwise, this additional efficiency package only qualifies if you're doing the ACH 50. Another one, so if you're using the performance pathway, the computer simulated, you have to be 95% of the standard reference design, so 5% below the standard reference, and you get to choose one of the additional packages. If you're doing 406, which is the ERI pathway, you just have to be 5% less than the ERI targets. So it's not going into any more detail on ERI other than just 5% less than the ERI targets. Okay, so now we're going to jump right into ERI. And so what I'm showing on the table to the right, the values that are struck through, those were the 2018 numbers. The values to the right that are underlined, those are the values that are were approved in the 2021 code. Those numbers are also the same numbers as what were in the 2015. So 2015 IECC is when the ERI came into the code. 2018 raised those ERI index scores, and then the 2021 has brought those scores back down to the 2015. The ERI, there was also confusion with the ERI. It had two backstops in there. It said, okay, using the ERI pathway, you just have to make sure that your building enclosure, your envelope, meets at least the 2009 IECC envelope requirements. And then it said if you were using solar, it would have to meet at least the 2015 envelope requirements. So that's all been removed. That was confusing. Again, clarifying, adding clarity to the code. Now what's done is it adds just a UA based on the 2021 IECC, which we've been talking about that table earlier. And so it's 15%. You can go 15% less than that table, and it doesn't matter where. It's all UA. It could be anywhere within that UA calculation. And that's the 2021. There is a requirement for on-site renewables that you could only take credit for 5% of the total energy used for on-site renewables. Talking with ResNet, Ryan Meyers, our program manager over there, they don't think there's going to be a lot of uptake on the ERI by builders because with renewables because of the 5% energy use. So this might be one where we'll see amendments at the local level. I'm anticipating that. Not sure how the software is going to handle that. The ability to have different credits or cap on renewables within the software. And so here's the ERI with the additional package option. So we talked about that. If you have the ERI, you have to be 5% less. So these would be the modified ERI scores with the additional efficiency package options. Okay, next one is the RECs. Boy, I'm going faster than I thought. Let me go back. Okay, RECs, renewable energy credits. This came into the code on the committee. I was actually an opponent to this. Didn't want to see it come into the code. Not that I don't believe in RECs, but I felt that I'm not sure how this is going to be enforced, how the building department is going to verify RECs, and all of the industry bringing that information forward to the building official to know about RECs and where the RECs are retired and so forth. And the REC it represents the environmental attributes of a megawatt hour of renewable energy. And so RECs, there's values to RECs. They could be sold, they could be traded. There's some values to RECs. And just because you buy a solar system and put it on your house doesn't mean you own the RECs. You have to find out upstream, did somebody else retain the RECs? On a PPA or lease, I think most people would know that they don't own it. They're just using the renewables on their structure. So that's RECs. It's in the code. Could be a little confusing. Electrification ready, and I'm almost done. And so electrification ready. This is also, I talked about the EVs and how that's happening across the country. And large and small cities are adding electric vehicle requirements to new buildings, residential and commercial. This is happening too, electrification ready. And so we're seeing it on the West Coast, we're seeing it to the Northeast, where the communities are saying, well, we want to be able to support and go to 100% renewables, whether it's on site or whether it's off site, but renewable, which really means moving to electrification. And so what this proposal does says if you put in a gas dryer, a gas range, a gas propane water heater, then you also have to install an electric service at that appliance within 3 feet of that appliance. And so that's what it's saying, have the capacity at the panel. There are a number of cities that I've looked at in California that have done this. So you can choose, you could put in this, or you can put in that. If you want to provide a lot of flexibility, you put gas and electric for your consumer, and then they can choose, the buyer can choose. Or if you just want to go gas, you just go gas. Excuse me, just go electric, So electrification ready, that's in. Closing up, zero energy. There's a zero energy appendix. That proposal came through, was approved. And what this does is it says communities that want to go to zero. There's a number of communities across the country are saying, I want to go to zero. They have climate plans, they have environmental plans in their communities, and they want to get to zero. And so this was developed, the proponent that submitted it looked at the information from ASHRAE 90.2, Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Home program, and came up with these numbers. So the middle column are ERI numbers without on-site power. That's where you need to start with for your zero energy appendix. And again, this is an option. If a community adopts it, then of course it becomes a requirement. And then your ERI rating index for zero is 0. So it's a fairly simple table. So one difference here with the appendix is this appendix, and each proposal is submitted separately. Now, proponents, people that submit the proposals, can coordinate with others, but many times the proponents don't know what Mike is submitting, and they don't know what I'm submitting. And so we might have proposals that are similar, or they have some relationship, but we have some difference. And in this case, the backstop here is the 2015 IECC, and as we talked about with the ERI, it's now a UA. So there is that difference. And then I'm almost done. And so 90.2 committee did all the modeling. These numbers are in the 90.2 standard, which is a residential standard. They met all of the ASHRAE cost effectiveness tests and requirements. And so that was submitted as part of the proposal. And also within the zero energy proposal, off-site renewables can be used, not just on-site, but off-site to get to that zero score. And there is a formula here. Not going to go into it, but there's a formula if you're using off-site power. And that needs to be put in for off-site power to comply with the zero energy appendix. And lastly, I'm going to leave this slide up for 30 seconds to a minute. The Mozingo Code Grip, they've been on this Green Builder Media webinars before and trained for Green Builder Media. And they have developed a significant changes document. They have one for residential and commercial. I'm just showing you the residential. It's free. I shortened the link for you, so bit.ly. So take a screen capture, write it down. Here's a link. You can get a free download of significant changes that they've written. And they've go beyond. They've got admin sections of the code. And they list the code section, which I didn't. I was just doing a presentation. So they've gone into that detail. Take a screen capture of that link, go to it, download it. It's free for your use. And I will now go to my last screen and say thank you so much. And Mike, you've got some questions.
Oh, we certainly do, Jim. So we're going to get right to them. And I encourage everybody to send in their questions via the questions box. If you have them, we're going to jump right in. We're going to start with Nina's question. Nina wanted to know, is there a protocol on how to conduct air tightness testing in a multi-unit residential building? Now, she's not referring to compartmentalization testing, but whole building testing.
Whole building testing. There are ASTM standards, and I'm not an expert on this, Nina. I would first go to ResNet and check with them and look at their multifamily standard committee to see what information they have produced, to see what's available out there for being able to do that type of test you were talking about in the protocol.
Okay. We got a couple questions from Fernando. Fernando's a good friend of Green Builder Media and the webinar series. I'll get to one of them right now. He wanted to know, will the compact hot water requirement mean that remote bathrooms will require a second hot water heater? So these would be bathrooms that would, extend far beyond that rectangle you were talking about.
No, because your rectangle will have to include that. So your rectangle, if you've got a bathroom that's at one extreme of a conditioned floor area, you would have to include that in your rectangle. And so what that means is your area is going to be larger. So your hot water distribution factor will be different, which will mean it'll be impact the hot water usage differently, not as efficient. And so it will just go into the calculation. No, you still have to do your square, your rectangle, but you just include that. Now, if there was a separate water heater supporting that one bathroom, that would be a separate rectangle. And maybe that rectangle would only be, I don't know, 120 feet. Then you would add those rectangles together and then do your calculation.
And Jim, my understanding on that particular change proposal, which was brought forward by our friend Gary Klein.
Gary Klein, yes.
Yeah. That proposal was incorporated really more as a credit. Is there really a punitive element to that particular change?
I believe it's a credit too. That's the way we looked at it.
Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to clarify on that because that's what I thought it was, but I wanted to make sure. We're going to stay on the plumbing for just a second. I had a question for you, Jim. Can you talk a little bit about how just the centralized plumbing change even ended up in the IECC?
You're talking about the compact
Yeah.
water? Okay.
Yeah.
You know, there's always a discussion about, does something belong in the energy code, or does it belong in a plumbing code or a fire code or a structural code? And so those are the things that are discussed. And those have been discussed about the electric vehicle. Do they really belong in the energy code, or do they belong in the electric code? And so in the energy code, it's not defining plumbing requirements. It's not defining requirements, electrical requirements, how you install the wire, how you install the outlet. It's just telling you, this is what you need to do. These are the efficiencies that you'll gain from this. And so it was viewed as an energy savings opportunity and not a plumbing requirement.
Gotcha. Okay. Wanted to switch it up just a little bit. Instead of plumbing, let's talk about lighting a little bit. Exterior lighting fixtures. Why were they exempted from the controls provision? Daylight sensors would seem to make a lot of sense for those.
Why were they exempted from the, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Their controls can still be part of the exterior lighting requirements. It's not saying you can't, it's just saying that now you've got electrical lighting requirements for the exterior. I did not go into all the details of what's in the exterior lighting requirements. And so when you look at it, it's saying you're comply with the commercial exterior lighting requirements. And so controls are part of that on the commercial, and also lighting power densities are part of the exterior. And so those are that's been one of the discussions over the last 6 years or so. Is it controls that are going to save energy, or is it the lighting power densities that have been going down and down and down as the industry has been manufacturing more efficient LED lamps, lighting products. So they're able to produce more lumens per watt. And so it's not limiting you that, it's not preventing that.
Gotcha. Okay. I just didn't know, if that was something that made sense, or, why exempt them out. But we do have another lighting question to get to, again, from our friend Fernando, who's down in Puerto Rico. Will full cutoff, so that's in parentheses, in quotation marks, will full cutoff exterior lights be required to help prevent dark sky lighting pollution?
That was I had this discussion with the industry. So this does not align with the dark sky standard. There are some communities in the 6th state region where SWEEP works that have dark sky requirements. So you go down to Tucson, they have dark sky requirements. And it's pretty fascinating to go into a neighborhood and you look up and you see all kinds of stars, and you look around and there's not many, if any, lights, exterior lights on residential houses because of that. And so does it conflict? Probably. What has to happen, just like they did in Tucson, you have to change your code, make amendments to lighting requirements in the code, and then pull in your requirements, your local amendments for the dark sky standard.
Okay. Wanted to switch to insulation, some insulation questions for you, Jim. So the first one is, it was kind of early in your presentation, you talked about when insulation, some of the requirements have changed from 13 and 5 to 13 and 10.
Yes.
So is there any estimation or projections or modeling from the energy efficiency community as to the associated energy savings with that change? And I know it's going to vary by climate zone, but has there been any look at that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So as each proposal is written, there is so you might see a proposal that's written that has one sentence or a change in a number, and that's it. And then the reason statement, and it's called the reason, it might be 3 or 4 or 5 pages with documentation, listing cost effectiveness, showing energy analysis, showing all of that. So yes, information was included. I don't have those exact proposals in front of me, but yes, that information was included with those proposals that were submitted. So all of these proposals had information submitted. The EV proposals had information submitted on what the costs were, doing it at construction and cost after construction, and references that are listed. So that information's there, not in the code, not in my brain, but it is in the proposals and the reason statements of the proposals.
Okay. Stephen had a question. Are there exceptions or reductions to the R value requirements for products such as SIPs that have less thermal bridging and improved air tightness?
Right. So the energy code, the way it's written, it has wood frame and it has mass walls, and those are the options prescriptively. If you use the UA trade-off, so let's just say the res check pathway, then you could take into consideration the values of SIPs or the values of ICF. So you can consider that in the res check, the performance path, and the ERI. So depending upon the components, the products you're using, that might dictate which pathway is chosen: prescriptive, performance, ERI, or UA trade-off.
All right. Also a question from Robert. He's asking about the prescriptive path specifically now. In climate zone 5, are you no longer going to be able to use cavity only insulation?
So in climate zone 5, in the 2021, if you're looking at the prescriptive table, and I'm looking at a small printout without having to scroll back, yes. So if you were building the prescriptive path, just that table, there wouldn't be an option.
Okay.
With
and that's what he was thinking too, but he wanted to make sure.
Again, you could use the res check. So you're looking at an overall UA of that building, that wall assembly, or you could use the performance path, or you could use the ERI. Now it's the same thing when we went up into we found the wood frame walls where they had a 30 in the colder climates. And you say, what on earth is a 30? How do I get an R30 in a wall? Well, there are some insulations that you can get in, but you're not locked into that, and you could use any type of framed wall assembly. It's not limiting you to a framed wall assembly material. And so again, the prescriptive is just prescriptive. The prescriptive is actually the most challenging and the most restrictive, because you have to do that. Whereas if you do res check, you've got some trade-off opportunities. If you do performance ERI, you have more trade-off opportunities.
Okay, we're going to keep going on with our questions, Jim. I had kind of a little minor detail question, but I still thought it was curious, especially because you're there in Denver where you're at elevation. on the elevation provision that you detailed earlier in the presentation, I'm talking about like for trying to comply with that, is that looking for the project site's elevation, or is it the elevation associated with the zip code?
That's a good question, because if you're in an area where a zip code starts at one elevation and it continues up 1,500 feet in elevation,
Or down.
or down,
Right.
Exactly. I believe the intent, I also don't believe it was written in the, it might be in the reason statement. I don't remember this discussion in our committee, but the intent is where that building is being constructed.
Okay,
That's
so the project site's elevation. Okay. Okay.
The project site. So there are a number of communities. So when the climate zones changed way back in the 2006 IECC, prior to that, it was heating degree days. And that's what was looked at. And then 2006, the climate zones came in. And the climate zones are based on a county. So right here in the Denver metro area, so there's Jefferson County. Jefferson County is at the same elevation approximately as Denver. But Jefferson County goes up into the foothills. And there are a number of communities that are 2,000 feet higher. And so what that county has done, the state of New Mexico has done, they changed their climate zones based on the location. And so I see the same thing. Where is the intent? Where is that building being constructed? State of New Mexico. If you go down to Albuquerque, you've got Albuquerque is in one county, and then right in that metro area, the north side is Rio Rancho. Rio Rancho is in a different county. That county goes further north. Rio Rancho's county is a colder climate than Albuquerque. And so what the state did, because they have a statewide code in New Mexico, they said, Rio Rancho is the same climate zone as Albuquerque. And there's the same thing down in Arizona, Peoria, and the county, Yavapai County, coming down into the Phoenix Valley. And so there's a difference in the northern part, Prescott, in one part of the county, and then northern Peoria in another part of the county. And they live in two different climates.
Gotcha. All right, we got some kind of individual topic type questions, nothing I can really group together. So we're going to go back to a question from our friend Fernando. Again, he's down in Puerto Rico. He said that based on what he saw during the windows portion of your presentation, it would seem to him that operable Gelosi windows, which are very common in the Caribbean, are not going to comply with the new energy code as it relates to leakage and R factor. And he's wanting to know if he's right on that assumption there.
I have to claim ignorance on the tropical zone. So same question, same issues would be in Hawaii. That type of window doesn't meet the R value of the code. And so what would happen then is local amendments would come into play for that type of window, that type of fenestration. But yes, you definitely have some air leakage issues. The other piece that's available for Puerto Rico is there's the tropical climate zone. And so that was pulled out into a different section. I don't have that off the top of my head for the 2018, but it was part of the general section of the 2018 tropical zone. And so it does have requirements, different requirements in there for ventilation, fenestration. I'm looking at the 2018 right now, glazing area, and so forth. So what I can do is I can look to see what the tropical zone change was, pass that along to you, Mike, and you can pass it down to Francisco.
Okay, and we have our friend Howard Wieg is also in attendance at this webinar today. So I've asked him via the questions box if he can send me his thoughts on this issue because he's
and Howard was a participant, so that's one thing great for those areas and Commonwealth and state of Hawaii that are in the tropical areas. So Howard was at the code committee hearings speaking for those areas of the code and those areas of the world.
Yeah. Howard's always a good guy to talk to. I enjoy time with him. Got a question from our friend Les, actually. Jim, you know Les, he wanted to know if the zero energy appendix can be adopted no matter the energy code that a jurisdiction has already adopted.
Sure, just like any other amendment. What we have seen last year, Denver, we saw some other communities in Colorado that took proposals from the 2021 code. At that time, they hadn't been approved, but now some of the ones we went through were approved, and they incorporated them into their code. So yes, if there's a conflict, then that would have to be addressed too, to make sure it's not conflicting with, Mike was asking, doesn't conflict with plumbing, doesn't conflict with the IRC and so forth. But the zero energy appendix, just like the zero energy ready, solar ready appendix, those don't really conflict with the code, and those could be added to any code version. And that's my thought, that they could be added pretty much to any code.
Right. And I think that's the beauty of the appendixes, is that you can say, okay, we're going to cite this appendix without having to adopt the entire code if you didn't want to. So a couple other questions, and I'm going to put a final call out there for questions from our audience. A couple of kind of big picture, more philosophical type questions for you, Jim. The first one is from Eric. Do you think the increasing interest in the IECC from policymakers will continue? And is this a good or a bad trend?
Oh, that's another webinar all to itself. So the IECC, because of there's some requirements in federal legislation. So the national standard for commercial buildings is 90.1, and there are requirements for DOE to make a determination every time a 90.1 gets released. Is it more energy efficient? That's what they need to do. And then they publish that in the Federal Register. It's more energy efficient, or it's the same, or less, if it was less. So they do that determination. They don't have a requirement like they do for residential, like they do on commercial, but they do it on residential. DOE provides funding to PNNL to do that analysis to see what the energy savings is. Is it the same? Is it more? Is it less? And so policymakers have been looking at the energy code more because they recognize that buildings are part of the equation as they've looked at environmental goals, they being the cities and counties and states. They recognize that the energy use in buildings contributes to their meeting their goals, their climate goals. And so I see it continuing. What I'm seeing now is I'm seeing communities that are leapfrogging the energy code. They're saying, I've got some pretty strong goals that have been out for a while. I have goals to reach certain levels by 2030, by 2035. And so I'm seeing local, I'm not seeing states in the Southwest, but I'm seeing municipalities that are saying yes, and they're going forward with a number of these proposals. So, like I was mentioning, there were a number of cities in the Southwest that have taken proposals from the 2021 and incorporated them into their 2018 adoption last year.
Well, you know, it's interesting you mentioned some of those goals, because that leads me into the final question I've got here. And that is, the U.S. Conference of Mayors has said they want to put the IECC on this glide path to net zero by 2050. Should that even be a goal of the IECC?
The way the ICC is structured, and it's a governmental consensus process, and it's a governmental members voting. The ICC, I don't see the ICC going there. Should they? I mean, I don't know. Yes, no, maybe. But ICC, the way ICC is set up, it won't go there. It has to be the governmental members. It has to go through the process like we just did with the 2021, where proposals are submitted and then they're finally approved through their online governmental voting process to take the code there. And like I was mentioning, there are some cities who are saying, well, we don't want to wait till 2050. We want to go there sooner. We want to move much quicker. And so they're taking proposals, and there were a number of proposals for 2021 that were able to take and include into their 2018. And there was a county up in the ski areas of Colorado. They just adopted their DOE Zero Energy Ready Home program as their code requirements for residential.
And this was
so
where?
We start Summit County. So if you come to Colorado and ski at Breckenridge and Keystone and Copper and so forth, you'll be in Summit County, and they've just adopted and moved to the Zero Energy Ready Home for residential.
That's for all single family.
Yes, single multifamily.
Oh, single and multifamily, both. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions. So, Jim, thank you as always for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us. Passing along a couple thank yous from the audience as well for a great presentation. So, thank you, Jim.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Take a picture of that link from Mozingo Code Group and take a look at what they've produced for significant changes for the 2021 IECC. Thanks, everybody, for your time. Thank you, Green Builder Media.
And thank you to our audience for attending and asking wonderful questions. Thank you to NV Energy for their generous sponsorship of this webinar. We're going to see you back here 1 week from today. That's right. We're going to go 2 Thursdays in a row. And we're going to change up the format a little bit. We're going to feature a conversation between Sarah Gutterman, CEO of Green Builder Media, and Aaron Emig, CEO of Brilliant. They're going to discuss essential smart home trends. We'll get underway at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Until then, I hope everyone stays healthy, and we hope to see you back here next week. Take care and commence the chicken dancing.